I'd like to introduce Deborah Greenwood. She's our current president of Puget Sound Book Artists. Deborah.
Thanks, Dorothy. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm really excited that there's such a great turnout and see so many of you. And I'd also like to welcome our guests today. Upon, kind of reflecting upon the events of this last year, and it made me, reminded me of the topic that we chose for our 10th anniversary celebration exhibition, and that was transformation. I don't think any of us could have guessed how transforming this year might be for us. One of the things I really want to do is thank you all so very much for continuing to be supportive members, for coming in and supporting our fundraising this year for the 10th anniversary campaign. Also for attending workshops and getting to know, the Zoom format. I know it's been a challenge sometimes. Also for, attending the workshops that we've been putting up and engaging in a lot of different ways. We really appreciate this. What I think it demonstrates is what a strong organization and friendships that we have created through our work together and the various things we've done that would help us to be able to, kind of bond together and work together during this pandemic, so that we can all continue our work and continue to learn. We're really pleased today to honor Clarissa Sly, who had donated the beautiful chandeliers and which we have used some of for our fundraising. We have an outstanding presenter today, and we'd also like to share some brief updates about our status and the status of the organization. And then we're going to have the chance to have breakout rooms to share ideas and reflections. So with no further ado, I really want to turn the program over to Jane so that she can introduce our presenter. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And it's such a pleasure to introduce this afternoon's speaker. In honoring the work of Clarissa Sly, I can't think of a better speaker than this afternoon's guest, Curtis Small. One of the unexpected benefits of Zoom is that it provides the opportunity to listen and to learn in ways that we would before been unable to. For example, Curtis joins us from Delaware, a mere 2,788 miles from Tacoma today, and that's pretty remarkable. So we are very pleased to welcome you, scholar and librarian Curtis Small. Curtis is the coordinator of public services for special collections at the University of Delaware Library, Museums, and Press. He is responsible for overseeing the reference, instruction, and exhibition programs. He also serves on the team of the award-winning Colored Conventions Project that documents 7 decades of 19th century Black political organizing. Founded at the University of Delaware, this important collection anchors the newly launched Center for Black Digital Humanities at Penn State University. As a public-facing digital research center, the center engages public and scholarly audiences in innovative community-based research, archive creation, and interactive digital exhibition making. Curtis's research interests include the history of African-American books, the history of colored conventions movement, Caribbean Francophone literature, and he has recently served as the co-chair of the Diversity Committee for the Rare Book and Manuscripts section of the Association of College and Research Libraries. In this capacity, he has helped develop activities and projects aimed at increasing diversity among professionals in the areas of special collections and archives. He holds a doctorate in French from New York University and a Master's in Library Science from Simmons College Graduate School. Curtis is also a member of the Book, Print, Artists, Scholars of Color Collective, founded in 2019 by book artist and assistant professor at Scripps College, Tia Blassingame. This collective brings scholars of book history and print culture into conversations and collaboration with book artists, paper makers, curators, letterpress printers, and printmakers to build community and support systems. In today's presentation, he will share his own research and perspectives on the work of Clarissa Sly, as well as that of Tia. So Curtis, thank you so much, and a collective round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I just want to talk in relation to, in particular, two book artists that I'm sure most of you are already familiar with, Clarissa Sly and Tia Blassingame. Clarissa's work will be the focus of what I'm talking about. She's a wonderful book artist and a wonderful person whom I've had the opportunity to meet. And I want to talk about these two books in particular, and another book as well, to surprise, in relation to certain types of physical danger, the importance of reading and literacy, but also some of the dangers associated with reading and literacy as represented in these artists' books. And I want to try to situate these books in relation to a tradition of work from the 19th century to the 20th century, activist print-based work, tradition that's often not discussed in relation to artist books. So I'm trying to bring artist books into a broader dialogue and broader scholarly body of work, you know, looking at African Americans and African American print culture. That's my basic goal here. And I can talk about how the Black Bibliography Conference relates to that, but I won't take up much time talking about that right now. I get the feeling that most of you are familiar with Clarissa and her work. This is an audience of book artists. I haven't had the opportunity to speak to an audience of book artists before. So you know Clarissa. Clarissa is one of the significant, most important book artists, and certainly one of the most significant and active African-American book artists of the 20th and into the 21st century. She has officially retired, but she's still active. And her work has dealt with themes of gender, of race, history, slavery, social justice, you know, in her career. And also somebody used the word transformation. I also think that transformation is a part of the work that Clarissa Sly does. So she's been an inspirational figure to me. And this book, Reading in Dick and Jane, with me, is a book that I used in an exhibit I curated last year in 2019, an illustration exhibit that was in our university museums. I co-curated it with the director of the museums, and we had a section on children's literature, and Reading Dick and Jane was the book that represented a response to a certain tendency in children's literature, although Reading Dick and Jane with me is not a children's book. So I wanted to delve a little bit more deeply into the book after that exhibit. And so I've been doing research in Black print culture and on Clarissa Sly, but there's not a big body of work on African-American artists' books now. And this is part of what we want to change, and what I'm trying to make some steps in that direction myself. Now, you know, her book, Reading Dick and Jane with Me, as you see here in this heading, is a reaction to the Dick and Jane readers. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Dick and Jane readers. I'm actually old enough myself to remember vaguely, I was exposed to them, I think, in first or second grade. They never made that much of an impression on me, but they made much more of an impression on Clarissa. And she, you know, she created a response and a critique. But the Dick and Jane readers, as a sort of a cultural phenomenon, were very popular in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s in the United States and in Canada into the 60s. By the 70s, they were going out of use. And 80% at a certain point, 80% of American children, I read, learned to read using the Dick and Jane readers. In his book, Literacy, Textbooks and Ideology, Post-War Literacy Instruction and Methodology of Dick and Jane, scholar Alan Luke argues that the Dick and Jane readers were largely not only educationally important, but there was an ideological dimension to the impact that these books had. And his analysis connects the Dick and Jane books with the emergent ideology of post-World War II industrial capitalism. He argues, and I find his argument persuasive, that these books represented a new type of literature, divorced from some of the traditions of storytelling that we find in literature and in children's literature, a new type of literature with the absence of a narrator, some of the traditional framing devices of storytelling, what he described as a closed world, characterized, as you see here, by repetition of actions and related words within a greatly limited lexical field, within the use of a limited vocabulary with repetition. The stories of Dick and Jane focus on a middle-class, white, nuclear family made of a father, mother, 2 daughters, a son, and a dog. And you can notice here that do what I do, the action of Dick is presented as a model to be imitated. Do what I do. In terms of the gender dimension of these stories within this nuclear family setting, which we can remember from 1950s and early 1960s television as well. The actions of the men of the family were sort of the foremost element of the story, and the women tended to be cast as helper, secondary, associated with domestic activities. So as Luke and others have noticed, these stories had a sort of a socializing effect, transmitting messages about how to be within this post-World War II industrial suburban world. And this is what Clarissa Sly is reacting to. Now, the absence of characters of color, the absence of rural children, of even poor white children has been noted by many, right? And even among children, it has been argued, or among white children, these did not represent the actual lives of most of the children reading them. Rather, they were an aspirational message to serve sort of a socializing function to be imitated. Now, I'll give you a second to read this story, this passage here from Alan Luke's book, which came out right around the time that Clarissa Sly produced her book in the 1980s. This is a rather sophisticated way of saying from Luke's analysis, which is based on sort of theory, which I won't get into some of the theory, leftist theory really, that he draws on for this type of analysis that was popular in the 1980s. Basically, the main point to be made is that most children looking at these books did not see their own experiences reflected in the books. They were not able to make a connection between their own experiences and what they saw in the books. And this is the main takeaway. And so, although this is not the only way to look at the Dick and Jane readers, I think that this is persuasive, particularly in terms of Clarissa Sly's response to the Dick and Jane readers. Her reaction corresponds to Alan Luke's analysis, particularly around the notion of erasure, the absence of children from different backgrounds, African-American in Sly's case, rural children in the Jim Crow South. So her book, now she told me that she did not actually have access to a Dick and Jane book. She didn't go back and get one and revisit the books that way. This was all based on her memory. Her book is based on her personal memories of having read the books and having seen that there were not children like her in the book. So I'm going to sort of walk you through rather quickly, how I think Sly brilliantly responds using the techniques of book arts, right? Visual and other techniques to respond and to comment on some of the effects of the Dick and Jane readers. So this is the first page. And I want to point out the figure on the left-hand side. Now, the title of the book is Reading Dick and Jane with Me, right? So who is the me? I believe this figure, the character unnamed that you see on the left is me, in quotes. And this particular figure goes through a transformation as the book unfolds. And what you see here on the first page is type that is drawn and inspired by the Dick and Jane readers, this repetitious, highly limited vocabulary. Here it's only maybe 4 words or 5 words that are repeated over and over again, expanded, exaggerated to the point of absurdity, right? To emphasize the limited nature of this vocabulary, I think, and some of the sort of psychic effect that this type of repetition had. However, you also see children, these photographs of children are children actually from Clarissa Sly's own community that she inserts into her reimagined narrative. She described this book as a reimagined narrative based on Dick and Jane. The book largely has a sort of a dialogic structure, structured as a type of visual dialogue in which one page represents a response or a recollection, a manipulation of images from Dick and Jane. The other page reflects the lives of the children of the community as represented in this book. Whereas the Dick and Jane readers did not step outside the limited world of the Dick and Jane characters, Sly's book introduces the social world of these Black children, as you see on the right-hand page. And also, you notice the contrast between the type on the right side, which is sort of manipulated and subverted type from Dick and Jane, the contrast on the right with this script that imagines the writing of one or more children from this community. So the children in this imagined narrative are responding and writing to this lesson. And you see that here the message, their response is rather positive. Come to our school, we go up too, okay? Interestingly enough, some of these images that you see on the left, like the airplane, are echoes of what is found in Dick and Jane readers, very close echoes. If she did not consult the books, she used her visual memory as an artist. I'm sure all of you have strong visual memories as being artists, to recreate some of the images from the book and their effect. This dialogue structure continues on this page, as you see. And I just want to note the script here becomes from the children, imagined as something that the children or one child produces. It becomes increasingly sophisticated, unlike the script from the Dick and Jane text. We read, see it go up. But if you notice the fainter text says, we don't talk like that, but we try to read it anyhow. So the book imagines a response of the Black children already observing that their lives are not reflected in the language. This page, once again, our dialogic structure, you see the church in the background. The book is introducing elements of the social lives of these Black children growing up in the Jim Crow South, as Clarissa Sly did. Also note the increasingly sophisticated language of the children. You play in your good clothes every day. We must keep ours nice for Sunday school days. So it's repetition, but the language is becoming more sophisticated at the same time that these children are seeing a difference between their lives, their social lives, in this case around class, I would say, and what's represented by Dick and Jane. And note our female figure here, who's sort of a part of the community and outside of the community of the children of the Black community, right? Let's note how she moves. In some instances, she's on one side of the page, and on other pages, she's on the same side as the children, as we see here. a longer sentence written in the imagined handwriting of the children. Our parents want us to read this stuff. We heard our teachers say that we're not smart enough. So the effect of living in an environment in which teachers actually say that the children that they teach are not smart enough, at the same time that they're encountering a book that does not represent their lives. And one of the last images, which has the longest sentence, the most sophisticated piece of language here that's repeated on the left. These stories seem more real than us. Everybody is so perfect. Everybody is so right. Who we are begins to slip away when our school books sound like we should be that way. Could we be that way? And the image here that you see, whereas before there were photographs of these children, here the image is of a smudged photograph that Clarissa produced by dragging this image over a Xerox machine. You book artists probably already figured that out. So the notion of danger, psychic danger, at the same time that something is being learned, the language is becoming more sophisticated, something is being lost. This is where the notion of danger in relation to this book. The more you look at this book, the more you see, right? Which is always true with good art. Now, like I said, this book focuses on one character, the me. This is one of the last pages of the book. And you see on the left-hand side that her transformation is represented visually by this image, this photograph of these Black children who, as I said, were from Clarissa Sly's own community. Clarissa Sly comes out of a photography background. You notice how the children are superimposed, suggesting that this character has established for herself a connection with this community, right, that she comes from, despite the Dick and Jane, despite the experience of Dick and Jane, not because of it. And at the end, there's an affirmation on the left. We know how to play fun games too, repeated over and over. I think it's a powerful, although disturbing experience that I personally can relate to, but television was more of the medium that caused this kind of disruption for me. When in the 60s, you know, there weren't a lot of people that looked like me on television. I wonder what was going on. And the effects of that can be very far reaching. Now, Clarissa Sly's book does end on a positive note, particularly in relation to this character, this figure, me, who ends up realizing that she has connection and that the story of these children in her community is worth being told. However, this does not mean, I don't think the book suggests that the damage done by the experience of reading these books and living in this social community, what's going on in the school, is also evoked in the book. Even the parents don't seem to understand what's happening to the children in school. The book is not suggesting that that damage is undone, right? What happens to the other children who are subjected to this experience? So I want to make a connection between Clarissa Sly's book and another book that reimagines, uses Dick and Jane as the basis of a reimagining, a reimagined narrative. And in this case, I'm talking about The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Toni Morrison, Pulitzer Prize winner, Nobel Prize winner for literature, who died last year. This is the cover of her first book, The Bluest Eye, the paperback edition on the left-hand side. And what you see on the right is the photograph from the back cover of the first edition, which we have in the University of Delaware. This was her first novel in 1970. And it's the story of a Black girl, like Clarissa Sly's book. The Bluest Eye focuses on a Black child, a Black female child who's about 11 or 12 years old in the novel, Pecola Breedlove. And this is a novel. It goes into a lot more detail of what the experiences of Pecola and those in her community, what their lives are like. But the point is that these individuals live in a community in Ohio that is bounded by racism and second-class status of the African Americans in this community in Ohio. However, she uses Dick and Jane as a reference point for the novel. Now, Pecola Breedlove, the central character who you see probably depicted on the left in the paperback cover, that's why I chose it, is a girl who is subject to racism, but also to judgment on her physical appearance from within her own African American community. She lives in a family, but troubled by alcoholism. She is raped and impregnated by her father. And by the end of the novel, she suffers psychic disintegration, something like a schizophrenic scene in which she imagines that, like the white dolls that she plays with, or maybe like Dick and Jane, she has blue eyes. And so the last passage is very disturbing. She's sort of split, and there's a voice talking to her about the blue eyes that she finally has. So she has been psychically destroyed. This is a very difficult novel to read, but it's a novel that humanizes this character of Pecola Breedlove at the same time that it points to a lot of the abuse and the difficulty. Another story worth telling, right? Now, the Bluest Eye uses Dick and Jane as a reference point for the novel. What you see here are this is one passage, but it's reproduced twice, 3 versions of this passage, which is inspired by Dick and Jane. It's a Dick and Jane-like passage referring to a family. Here is the house, it is green and white, it has a door, mother, father, Dick and Jane, etc. I don't think that this text is drawn from Dick and Jane reader, but it's inspired by that style that you can recognize. And as you see here as book artists, and I found it interesting that this book uses typography, like Sly did herself. She takes the Dick and Jane language, or language inspired by Dick and Jane, and transforms it visually to make a powerful visual message. So what you see on the right-hand side is the 3rd version of that passage. It's the same as the first version, but it is rendered almost unfamiliar by the removal of all the space between the words. And this passage is, in a certain way, summarizes the entire novel, The Bluest Eye, by virtue or through this Dick and Jane type passage. And what I mean by that is that Dick and Jane is used as a framing device for the novel. That final version of that paragraph that doesn't have any space between any of the words is actually broken up. That passage is divided up throughout the whole novel to serve as chapter headings for the chapters in the novel. So what you see on the left, here is the house, it is green and white. That's the first sentence of that passage. That is the chapter heading of it's a very disturbing visual effect, right? So it lets you know something about the nature of the experience of those in the novel itself. So it's divided up throughout the whole novel. So every line of that passage will function as a chapter heading to sort of make a contrast between this idealized language and the very difficult experiences of the family of Pecola Breedlove. Now, I guess my point here, I want to just wrap up this part by saying that these 2 artists, I'm focusing on Clarissa Sly, but Clarissa Sly as well as Toni Morrison are reinserting and honoring the lives of African Americans and making them visible in a way that they were not visible in the Dick and Jane readers. And the point is that although these individuals have difficult lives and have been erased, they are worthy of being centered in stories. And so this notion of of resurrecting stories, honoring those who have gone before, who have been lost through our through our artist books, through literature, through whatever type of art it is, and through scholarship, is sort of a central motivating factor for me coming out of the Black Bibliography Conference, which had a similar goal, right? Black Bibliographia is actually the name of our conference, which brought together scholars of African-American print culture. It also brought book artists such as Tia Blassingame. And I want to sort of step back and in trying to make a connection between the work of book artists and the work that's being done by scholars of print culture, they have not often been in dialogue. They've not often been in dialogue. There's not a body of scholarship that I have found on African-American artist books and some of the issues that scholars of print culture have taken up. So I just want to step back briefly and try to make this connection. You know, the notion of literacy is the act of learning to read, but literacy is also a social act. The act of learning to read, of becoming literate, is the act of taking on a social identity. And at different historical times, learning to read has different social meanings. So we sort of get a sense of what that was, and the problematic with Clarissa Sly's book, What Learning to Read with Dick and Jane meant, and the problem, right? African Americans have dealt with this type of danger, this contradiction for all of our history in this country. Going back to the 19th century, the narrative of life of Frederick Douglass, for example, in that book, that slave narrative that charts his path from enslavement to liberation, learning to read was a very important part of his path to freedom. So in African-American literature, learning to read has often been posited as something very important on the road to liberation. And the historian Heather Williams points out that many, such as Frederick Douglass, learned to read in the 19th century by using books such as Webster's Elementary Spelling Book. And Heather Williams is interested in the mark that African Americans made on these books as they interacted with them, taking on a new social identity, right, through learning to read in this way. In a little later in the 19th century, when African Americans were emerging from enslavement, many used the Freedmen's Spelling Book to learn to read. And the freedmen's schools. Heather Williams and others note the importance of literacy for African Americans. They realized it was very important to learn to read. They saw that as a part of becoming American citizens. But in using books like the Freedmen's Spelling Book, written by whites, they were subject to messages which in some instances erased their own contributions to the Civil War, for example, by suggesting in a spelling book that you ought to be thankful to those whites, Northerners, for example, who were working for abolition. The part of the problem, Heather Williams says she doesn't know what African Americans would have thought when newly emerging from slavery, encountering a book that suggested that they were not responsible for their own freedom, when we know that African Americans were. So I'm trying to make a connection between the situation that somebody like Clarissa Sly is evoking in reading Dick and Jane with me and the situation that African Americans have dealt with for a long time. Now, I want to sort of come full circle in a way and make a connection with much more recent work by a book artist who you probably are familiar with as well, Tia Blassingame, who was young working artist who started a collective that I'm a part of. And I'm interested in her book, Mourning, produced in 2015, because it looks back and it also is very much about the present time and some of these themes that run through the history of African-American print culture, social life, through the work of Clarissa Sly and others. Mourning is a book, she calls it an abecedarian. She produced it in 2015. So by using the term abecedarian or abecedary, she is linking back to books like Webster's Spelling Book, books that Americans of all sorts used to learn to read and to learn the alphabet and to learn to read. But she transforms that tradition by producing a book that uses the letters of individuals who have died as the result of police violence, anti-queer violence, anti-trans violence, misogynistic violence, those who have been lost as a result of this type of violence. The book does not explain that. What you see, these pages are typical. You see the name, you see the letter from that name, and you see a symbol. She uses browns, shades of brown, and what she's doing is using symbols from the International Maritime Alphabet that ships use to transmit messages. The flags use these symbols to transmit messages, oftentimes warnings among themselves. So she uses this device to organize her abecedarian. The reader is forced, if you're not familiar with who Jordan Davis is, the book invites you to do your own research to find out who he is or was, because all of these people are people who have been lost as a result of the types of violence that I referred to a second ago. On another level, the book invites you to do research to find out what is the meaning of the particular symbol that I'm looking at, because as I said, all these symbols are drawn from the maritime alphabet and the symbols that accompany them. So there is an explicit message connected with the image you see on the right. For example, it may say something like, help, in danger of sinking. You would have to do your own research to look it up online and find out what is the specific message. You don't have to do that, but I just want to sort of finish by saying that I see work like this being a part of the tradition of Clarissa Sly and those who have gone before. What she's doing here, Tia, is recalling those who have been erased, who have been lost by the very real danger of violence. And she's producing a very humanizing and I think beautiful homage to these individuals because the book is graphically, it's beautiful. She uses these symbols in a way that is beautiful to look at. And she substitutes the colors of the flag for the colors, the black and brown of the skin of those who have lost, along with blue, which is a reference to the importance of the ocean and the sea and slavery itself in African-American history. So a book like Tia's brings back the question of what does literacy mean? What does it mean to be literate or to use the notion of literacy in the present moment when quote unquote learning to read means becoming aware of the effect of police violence and other types of violence on oppressed communities, right? The book does not offer the answer to that, but the book is warning us to be aware of what's going on now, right? And the different types of literacy we need to develop to understand the present moment and understand the past. So I think that this work is all of a piece, with what's been going on within African-American print culture, political organizing, book work, et cetera. So I'm interested in drawing those kinds of connections and telling these stories that are worth being told despite having been erased in the past. So I will add, this was 33 minutes. I went a little over, but I'm going to end there. And these are some of the sources I used. I can get those to people if you are interested. But I want to thank you for listening, and I'm eager to hear your questions and comments.
Curtis, I'll just start off. This is Jane. I just want to thank you so much. Your thoughtful presentation gives us so much to think about, and I feel that the work that you're doing is really important scholarship that will contribute so much to the future, because it's something that needs to be written about, and it's something that is really important in terms of the work that's being done by book artists to become part of that conversation. So just on that level, I want to thank you. And I should have said at the very beginning that I heard from Clarissa and her partner, Kim, and they both send their gratitude for your research and your scholarship. They're very sorry they couldn't join us today, but they're actually attending another workshop. But I did want to pass on that message. So I see we have a couple of questions in the chat. From Angela Weaver, how do you introduce these works to faculty and encourage them to include them in your classes?
Well, as a part of my outreach, my conversations, a faculty person invites me to come and talk or do an instruction session, one or more. I will bring these books and I will suggest these books. And although the faculty person may not be aware of them, but I'll bring them into the classroom. And I like to have students engage in activities. Now it's harder, so everything is online, but I introduce them to faculty as a part of my outreach and suggest that they work with them, basically, or that they at least let me introduce them to the students. I have brought Mourning into classes and had students look at it, and I say, get out your phone, don't be afraid to Google these names and try to figure, without telling them anything, what's going on with this book. And it's interesting to see them discover it.
How do you introduce these works to librarians across the country and encourage them to purchase?
Well, I sort of hope to do that by activities like this, by speaking. I've been speaking increasingly online now at a number of different online events for the Bibliographic Society of America, for Rare Book School. I'm a part of the RBMS. Am I good?
Yeah, that's great. For those on the call, I just want you to be aware that the University of Puget Sound owns both of the artist books that Curtis talked about. And hopefully when we are once again open to the public, you can come in and look at them in greater detail. Curtis, we have used Reading with Dick and Jane with graduate students in education to talk about the importance of inclusion in the classroom. And as a result of that book, students have actually created their own books about feelings of being left out or not being included. So that's been a great way to use that book with helping teachers that are going into the classroom.
I'm going to say that doing events like this is useful for getting me to do more research and to think and present, but also to get ideas and to get feedback from people, such as yourself. So, and as of now, the focus of this work has been scholarly because I have training in literary criticism. That was in my previous life on my PhD, right? And as a librarian, a public services librarian, I'm teaching a lot. I'm involved in committee work and some of the diversity work for RBMS. And so I had gotten away from sitting down, thinking about these books in a more analytical way, doing research, in order to, it all started really with me, once we had the shutdown, asking myself, why am I in this profession? Basically, it all started with sitting out to think and write about why did I become a special collections librarian? And having a chance to reflect and read. And so far, it's mostly been sort of reading and writing and starting to present it in forms like this. I have not yet come up with a plan of how to more broadly distribute it among librarians, although that is something that's very important. And I'm open to suggestions and to these questions. Let me think about that, right? However, one of the challenges with artist books is that by nature, they are limited in their, limited in scope. And I never heard of an artist book before I became a librarian. I never even heard of them. Where do you find them? You find them in special collections. You have to go into special collections usually to see it. So part of my question is, how can artist books have the maximum impact on the culture? And, and I'm kind of frustrated in a way by the fact that they are sort of off in a little corner oftentimes, even of library land. So somebody asked a question of something about publishing for, is there any chance these two books would be published for a wider audience of reader? That's sort of the issue, how can we make them more available? Can we do it digitally? When I was doing some of the research for this, to work on these books, you need to have the book. You need to be able to access the book. If the book is sitting in my library and I can't even enter because of the COVID shutdown, at first, I had to use what was available online. Maybe if they could be made available, at least digital surrogates, it would allow people to have some type of experience with the book, even though there's no substitute for having the actual physical material book. We do know that, but it's an important question. And I haven't had a chance even to discuss it with Tia yet. Tia put together a whole collective, and the whole focus of this collective is to bring people together and look at these questions, right? She obviously has a vision. We're gonna meet. Everybody's been busy. The collective has come together, through email and through one Zoom meeting. We want to put our heads together to think about these questions, how to bring different types of research, and activity together, book artists and scholars, how to have artist books make a bigger impact on the culture. Because I think that they have an important role to play. And once you become a librarian, of course, you're in special collections, you realize, oh, book artists, they play with the book form in ways that other artists and creators can't do. They call into question what the book is by distorting it or by, being inventive, and it's sort of amazing once you start to get, addicted to that. So somebody asked about how children learn to read currently. And, that's outside of the scope of my research so far and my training. I don't have an answer to that question. However, not a good one. But I do know, I think we all know, that there have been many people who realize that children's books need to reflect the lives of many different kinds of children. So that there are many books now that take on a lot of these issues rather than doing what was going on during the era of Dick and Jane with sort of a cookie cutter image of the American family.
I think we have time for one more question. I know we could spend the entire afternoon with Curtis, but if anyone has a closing remark or final question that they'd like to make, perhaps I might ask you, Curtis, do you anticipate having another Black Bibliographic Conference coming at the University of Delaware? And perhaps you could just have a few parting words about the success of that event that was held last year.
I'm putting my email in. Feel free to contact me with questions, comments, suggestions. In terms of the Black Bibliographia Conference, it was organized by me, by Laura Helton, who's a faculty member at the University of Delaware who works on African-American book history, and Jesse Erickson, who is a scholar and bibliographer also at the University of Delaware. And like I said before, the whole idea was to bring people together, book artists. We invited Tia to give a keynote. It was one of the best conferences I've ever been to, because people, this is an emerging area. You know, you had young people, graduate students, all different aspects, people working on, you know, engraving, and what techniques were they using in order to represent Black skin tone in the 19th century, printed fans, church fans in African-American, you know, in Black churches, they have these fans, you know, somebody was talking about a collection of those, all kinds of things, you know, and there was one paper given by a graduate student that said, book artists need to be looking at work by scholars, you know, of print culture. It was sort of a first step, you know, and I decided to follow a little bit in those footsteps, you know, to start thinking about these things.
That's great. Curtis, you were a wonderful speaker and have given us so much to think about. We want to thank you. We're going to give you a collective round of applause. You are more than welcome to stay for the remainder of our meeting. We'd love to have you, but right now, everyone, we're going to take what we're calling a 5-minute stretch break. You can stop your video, take 5 minutes, and come back and turn your camera on, and we'll start our business portion. But again, Curtis, thank you so much.
So I'm going to step away because my Thanksgiving break now can actually, I have a whole week off. You can actually.
Oh, you can relax and have fun. But we are very grateful.
I'm just going to say that Pat Chupa, I see, had what I think is a suggestion of print collectors printing the book. So I'm going to take note of that for our conversation with the collector. Oh, there you are, Pat. I see you nodding. Thank you. So thank you so much, everybody. I don't know whether we're going to have another Black Bibliographia conference. However, once we're over this COVID, there's going to be more conferences, that's for sure. And there are going to be more online events, and I can share that information with Jane. I have some more events coming up. I'm going to be talking with Tia, and our collective is going to have another event. So I can share that, okay?
And Curtis, perhaps someday you can come the 2,788 miles west.
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
5 minutes, everyone. Thank you.